Yeah, I mean, I hope that's the case too, because I think the risk is that the opposite could also happen too, is that that professional is pushed to go faster and harder because the automation side of things as well, right? And this approach is a top down and bottom up. It is all about the intention that is set when these things are put in place. And I think we have to acknowledge in many ways, people think that these are going to save money, but complexity also costs money. And so, as you're adding new technologies in place, you're adding complexity in place, and you're adding explicit cost of the technology, but then you're also adding transition cost and adoption costs and those kinds of things as well. And so, it is about the intentions of the leadership. Is the intention of the leadership that we'll be able to do what we used to do more efficiently? Or is the intention that we're going to do what we used to do more efficiently so we can do more?
Hi there, I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I am honored to have with me Mike Scafidi. And Mike is a digital consultant for modern marketing. Welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for being a guest on Talking TA this morning.
Thanks, Denise. That's fantastic. Thanks for having me today. I have spent the last 30 years on both agency side as well as Fortune 50 side at PepsiCo. And really, the core is how do we help brands drive performance through modern marketing, through using the realities of marketing, which is the data and technology behind it, to drive customer behavior.
Thank you, which is what we need right now. This is a big topic, especially in talent acquisition and HR. We're all trying to reshuffle or shuffle, either way, our industry and become advisors, consultants, coaches, practitioners versus recruiters. We are just taking on new roles now. And so marketing ourselves and branding ourselves to our customers, to candidates is really super important. Um, you had mentioned on our initial call something that was so huge for me. Human, as in the human resources and how the human aspect of our industry is a resource. So let's dive into that.
I often think about the human resource in contrast to the human resource department within any company. And more so as technology becomes integral into the lives of professionals and anyone working. You know, often team members are concerned about what's their role in a progressing world with more and more technology. And it is always reinforced that it's actually the human resource that is the most limited resource that any company has. Any resource a company can have, they can go buy more materials, they could buy more machinery, they can build more plants. But it's a human resource that's able to adapt as things change. And so, how do you find that human resource that's going to help a business succeed and move forward through this sort of ever changing world and more rapidly changing world that we're part of?
How are humans in an organization the largest asset? Even though you say they're limited, it's also the largest asset for an organization. So we're limited on the human aspect of it, yet it's the most pivotal, most important part of our organizations.
We're always questioning how many humans is it going to take to do the job, right? And of course, we want to make sure that our compensation or costs of those resources are managed. And so, in that, it puts pressure on reducing the size of the human resource. But as we're doing that, I think it's always important to think about what is the quality of the work that we're getting out of these changes. How are we identifying whether that quality is good? And even as we're looking for the human resource, where are we looking for that human resource and what are we expecting out of it? And so that human resource, the needs are changing, the types of jobs we're expecting them to do is changing, and their understanding of what their job is changing. But in the end, it's the most adaptive aspect of any of our companies.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the digital modernization of human resources. I mean, because that's a huge conversation, and it's something that you've got a lot of experience with, especially what 9 years with PepsiCo, right?
I think often people are concerned about a data driven world, a world that removes the potentially subjective nature of things that will allow the companies to succeed. And often team members get very defensive about the objective sort of digitally driven or data driven world. And part of sort of what I look at as I work on digital transformation with organizations is what's most critical is the culture and the adoption of these changes. And often with what often people think of as data driven, I actually shift it to what we call data informed. And really, what we want to do is we want to help team members be more informed by the data and use it to enrich their understanding. And so, as people think about what is it that makes them good at their job, it's their experience, it's their life experience. And so, as I look at sort of a data informed culture, it is how do you bring more life experiences to those team members? How do you bring them more information to help them make their decisions? So that's on sort of the data driven side. Then there's on the capabilities side. There is, as we get more and more technology, do people's jobs get automated? And the question is really, if you have something that takes a task that can be automated, what does that open you up to be able to do? How many more things can you take on? How do you start to think about things that you couldn't think about before? And so the the transformation aspect is how do you sort of embrace it because the change often happens without your ability to control or restrict that change. And so it is more of that glass half full. If this stuff is happening, how do I start to change my perspective and think about, well, what is this going to enable me to do versus what is it taking away?
Let's talk about you mentioned the corporate culture aspect of it. How is what effect on corporate culture will the digital modernization have? I mean, because corporate culture is something that's kind of in the hot seat right now, in my opinion, because there's so many changes and people are saying it starts with leadership. How can we change though corporate culture, especially like what you're talking about? We've got these jobs shifting, we've got new responsibilities, we've got things that we're pushing over to AI or to software now to do, which I think is magnificent. In fact, it's interesting. There was a group that was on a show recently that I watched, and they were talking about healthcare and doctors and nurses and how they used to have to jot down and manually keep track of all their notes and records for patients, and now it can all be done with AI and with software. And what that's doing then is freeing up the healthcare workers then to have more one-on-one contact and interaction with the candidates. And they even said, or the candidates with the patient. And they even said at the time, how often do we walk into a doctor's office, right? And you've got the doctor, the nurse sitting there typing notes, and they're not really paying that much attention to you. They're doing the typing away. Now that's gonna change where they can actually spend more time speaking with you eye to eye, face to face, while the software in the background is running, taking notes for them and kinda keeping track of the patient updates, if you will. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. But from a corporate culture standpoint, what shifts are we seeing and what effect?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's the case too, because I think the example you set out for the medical professionals, that would be a great outcome. I think the risk is that the opposite could also happen too, is that that professional is pushed to go faster and harder and see more patients for shorter periods of time because of the automation side of things as well, right? And so I think this approach is a top down and bottom up, right? And so it is all about the intention that is set when these things are put in place. And I think we have to acknowledge in many ways, people think that these are going to save money, but complexity also costs money. And so as you're adding new technologies in place, you're adding complexity in place and you're adding explicit cost of the technology, but then you're also adding transition cost and adoption costs and those kinds of things as well. And so it is about the intentions of the leadership. Is the intention of the leadership that we'll be able to do what we used to do more efficiently? Or is the intention that we're going to do what we used to do more efficiently so we can do more? Right. And I think if it's a growth mindset, it's very different than a efficiency mindset. And so, yeah. Yeah. So the efficiency mindset is let's see if we can do what we used to do more efficiently. Right. And I think there are potentially negative implications to culture as you try to do what you used to do more efficiently. Versus a growth mindset, meaning we're going to do what we used to do more efficiently so we can do new things. And so, is that new things having a better relationship with patients? Is the new thing being able to focus on innovation? Is that new thing being about freeing up the mind space to think about things that we haven't been able to think about before? So, yeah, I think as we often think about technology as from efficiency, I think what's critical in transformation is to think about it as growth.
It's interesting though. I'm going to draw a parallel between what you were talking about on the patient and the healthcare side and what we're experiencing now in talent acquisition. And this has been going on for a long time. When I started this business before technology was even a thing, really. If we had one or two candidates that we could get in touch with a day, if we could get 2 interviews done a day and 2 candidates submitted for any one job, we were doing good because we didn't have technology to push us faster. And then all of a sudden now we had all these tools and now you had job boards but it also was driving a lot of pressure to get more candidates to move faster, to do now what they called high demand hiring. So that like you were talking about with the doctors having to see more patients, it was the same thing with all of us. Now we had to interview more candidates. It's still the same thing. So now what are we going to do? One of the things we talked about was CTO digitization and transformation, right? And what can companies target for the next 3 to 5 years that's going to advance us with the digital footprint, but also kind of keep us at a pace that we can, where we're not feeling so stressed all the time.
Yeah, and I think if you're strictly efficiency driven, then you may not be thinking about unintended consequences, right? Like, in essence, it's the wrong KPI. If efficiency may be the wrong KPI versus quality, like if quality is the right KPI, having more resumes potentially can give you better quality. But if you're focusing on efficiency, how fast can I go through resumes and how many more resumes can I go? Then you're using the same tool, but to a different end. And so I think that's often a challenge with any kind of technology is you bring it in for a certain reason, but you don't realize that's actually not the reason why you really need it. And so it definitely changes how you structure your design and how you execute things. So it is sort of across the board as how do we understand that there's a behavioral outcome to the way that we make our decisions and the way that we use technology and that leads to sort of this transformation as well into digital transformation is understanding why we're putting tools in place and if it changes behavior you may have unintended consequences and so you have to sort of anticipate the behavioral change and see, are you actually putting a reinforcement cycle in place that will lead you to a place that'll cost you money instead of saving you money?
A reinforcement cycle. I like that. So explain that more. I haven't heard that term.
Well, I think anything that anything that we put an incentive for any team member in place, right? If your incentive is to get more resumes, right? And to place more people, that's a reinforcement model, right? You're being told to do a specific task towards a specific KPI, more people, because you have a certain number of seats you need to fill. Uh, but that's not really the reinforcement model we want to set in place because it creates unintended consequences of potentially
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
turnover, right?
Burnout.
Changing culture, burnout. And so it doesn't mean you still wouldn't use the same tools to make the process more efficient, but your goal may be to hire better employees by having a larger pool to pull from. And it still might be slower than you want, but the efficiency is still there because you're seeing more resumes. And so that's often when we think about training any technology towards a goal, we always set a reinforcement point, right? And in human nature, right? We give someone a target, right? We set them a sales target or whatever it is. And we have to think when we're managing people, well, what are they actually going to do? What's the human nature here? And how are they going to react to what we're putting in front of them?
Ooh, yeah. Right now, we have a lot of people focused on trying to get people back or here in the US to do a lot of the jobs. And there is a lot of pressure there to fill those jobs with US people. But what is the consequence there like you're talking about? What's the reinforcement model around offshore teams?
I've built so many offshore teams in my career, and so many times we focus on not just the billable rate, but more importantly, the culture and ability to deliver quality. And often you'll realize if you're doing offshore just to reduce rate, then again, that reinforcement cycle is off because you can reduce rate and you can have a quarter the cost maybe than you would someone domestically. But if it takes twice as long, then you've just doubled your normal cost, right? And so or so yeah, if you're a quarter of the cost, I mean, it's half the cost if it takes twice as long. If it takes 4 times as long, it's a break even. But that break even also doesn't include any of, like, the other communication overhead and all of that stuff as well. And so, often I like to think of offshore teams instead of offshore as a distributed team, right? Because I've worked with distributed teams that are across multiple cities across the US, but then also we've had our quote unquote offshore teams. And the importance is to call us all a distributed team and start to sort of build a unified culture that it's not just sort of throwing it over the wall. And how do we work together? And so the goal is to deliver the same quality work and find the stars in those locations. If it happens to be less expensive because that's what the rate is in the market, that's the rate in the market. And I think since people have been more comfortable working remotely, it's even flattened the playing field even further. People have gotten more comfortable working with distributed teams, and even those distributed teams are able to demand a premium if they're really good too, right? They would be less expensive, but there is sort of a flattening. And so now it's about, again, that human resource. Where are you going to find the best people to deliver your product in the best way possible, the most affordable rate? And so when we think about back to office, similarly, looking at what we're reinforcing potentially limiting our talent pool to a geographical region. We're reinforcing limiting our compensation amounts to that geographical region. I'm in the New York metro area. Resources are expensive, and there are a lot of resources around the world that are very capable as well. And so it is often thinking about why we're having people come in to the office. And there are industries that need physical collaboration, physical materials. Culturally, there might be a lot of coworkers that do have to come to the office. So the other ones that don't have to, is it still build morale and build culture if everyone comes into the office? I think there's valuable reasons for all of those things. And I think it's really just making sure you're deliberate about all of those, all of those things and understanding those trade-offs.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, the return to work or return to office, I should say, is kind of becoming a bigger and louder conversation over the last year, I think. But going back to the offshore teams though too, you brought up an interesting point. Keep tracking data on where you are more efficient, like you said, and also but the growth factor. Because I know just in the talent acquisition space, when we have offshore teams or people in distributed locations who are helping to coordinate sourcing, as we call it, recruiting, onboarding, interviews, that type of thing. And now you're throwing AI into the mix since the software involved. Where are we going to find those efficiencies, right? And still have room for the growth and keep like you said, keep an eye on the growth factor because that is going to be one of your KPIs, right, for the organization. And also the turnover. The turnover piece of it can be huge in any industry, but with talent acquisition, I know that turnover has always been one of probably the biggest problems that we have seen internally with corporations, also with agencies. So it doesn't even really matter whether you're working inside or externally as a recruiter, there's been a lot of turnover. So, how do we improve those? I know there's a lot of really large companies like Corn Ferry is one. And then who's the other one? Ronstadt, I think, is another one where they have the offshore or the people in distributed locations. But there are times, though, that I've heard people come back, and even IBM Professional Services, but they can come back and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, we made a mistake. We took bit off more than we could chew, hiring these big companies to come in and take over our talent acquisition teams because there's a lot of those people who don't understand our business. They don't understand the culture. So, like you said, now you're backing up. You've got to retrain these people and bring them up to speed where the people you had before already knew that culture. They already knew your company, but they've left for whatever reason. So it's an ongoing issue with us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, where's the talent retention team versus the talent
That's right.
acquisition team,
I
right?
love that.
Um, if you're bringing people in to fill a seat, they don't feel loyalty. They feel that they're brought in as someone to execute on a project. And so if you're bringing them in from a project mindset, then their relationship with your company is the expectation is that it may end at the end of the project. And if that's your goal, that's your goal, and that's fine. And I think companies need to recognize that savings has the cost of having to deal with attrition and problems with retention. I think similarly, just calling it an offshore team versus a distributed team is foundationally different. If you talk about it as a distributed team, you think about them as colleagues and coworkers, and you engage them in like employee resource groups or things that are adjacent to their day-to-day job, but it is about the culture. And I've seen their team members that they don't just want to go to the place where they can make the higher salary. They want to go to a place that they feel valued and then that they feel that they are contributing to something bigger and also potentially have a career path, right? It is not just about being slot into a specific job title, but they see that this is where they can progress and grow. And so it is, again, a deliberate decision on efficiency. Why are we building the teams we built? If it is to fulfill a project role and to complete the project, that's fine. And we have to accept that at the end of that project, the investment to the team member is equivalent to our outset. If we want to build and have a growth mentality, then it's about when this project's over, what do we intend to do with these people? And do we want to be able to innovate and go beyond our current capabilities? And I think that's where I th- we were getting confronted with this with the general concept of offshoring. I think that concept is getting accelerated because of AI as well. So they're hand in hand. And so it is an intention. What is the intention? And I think as team members and employees, I think it's also important to go in with eyes wide open and what we're looking for. And it's fine if you want to jump on a project as a hiring manager. Unfortunately, the expectation is like if you get 2 years out of someone, that's good. I mean, to me, I that's really sad to me because I feel like substantial change happens when someone really understands not only the sector that they're working in, but the the organization that they're working in and how can they improve it. Um, and 2 years is a very short time to be able to make substantial change within an organization.
Oh, for sure. You brought up the peer support models when we spoke before. Let's introduce this concept because I really, really like hearing. I hadn't even heard of this. I knew that there were employee resource groups that we've heard about. And there are, for example, in our industry, some talent acquisition groups that have started and stopped. I don't know that there's a lot of them that have stayed consistent over the years. I think that COVID kind of crashed a lot of them and they've had a hard time kind of getting restarted again.
Yeah, and I think there is a also a connection with many of the employee resource groups as well. I think we could also differentiate between some of these peer support models and networking groups. I think often networking groups are sort of a ladder climbing endeavor. And I think those exist, and I think there are many out there. But I also see that there are other groups that are coalescing around a shared value and shared culture. And with that enables vulnerability and growth for all participants. And so if we look at these some of these sort of pure models, it is about how do I grow? How do I not have to polish everything like professionally everyone does and say, a LinkedIn environment, right? A LinkedIn is you're showing your best self and it's you people are very cautious about being vulnerable at all in that kind of space. But if you're not vulnerable, you can't grow. Right. And so the question is, what kinds of these organizations can you grow in? One of the groups, as far as for job seekers, is Never Search Alone. And Never Search Alone is a peer job search or even peer job strategy environment where you're working with others and you're vulnerable, right? You're exposing and identifying your strengths and your weaknesses and helping other people through it. Another group that I'm part of is Open Water, and Open Water is for mid-career professionals. And the genuine culture there is we're trying to identify what the future of work looks like for people that have had parents that worked in a very different way with corporations that were more committed to them with pensions and different work-life balance structures than we're seeing today. And so these sort of peer support groups help you figure out what is this world looking like? How do we build models for ourselves that we can think about what the future of work looks like?
Correct. And then you also had mentioned too, job search councils. I hadn't heard of that. And we spoke.
Yeah, like it's part of Never Search Alone is you build these peer job search councils, which is a group of 6 individuals. And so you're working through a career strategy process, right? What are your strengths? What do you like to do? What is the next step for you in your career in a fairly methodical way versus a lot of people think about their next step as opportunistic or just looking, uh, at what's available and being fairly random about it. And so the career strategy is a very different mechanism again than it was previously. And the ability to find that next role is a lot more about how are you being very clear on who you are and continue to build your network of people of and understanding how your strengths can help different businesses and what's good for you as an individual. Where's the phase of your career? Are you looking to work for another 15 years and you want to continue working with a corporation? Do you want to go start your own thing? And so it is about being strategic. And I think a lot of people haven't had to really take that pause and understand like what is the next step
Yeah, a
for
lot
my
of people,
career.
and I brought this up with some other podcast guests. A lot of people now are looking at doing contracting or starting their own LLCs, if you would, so they can be independent and have that autonomy and not have to worry about layoffs or people kind of like focusing on more project oriented type of work. And I think these job search councils could be helpful in that, as well as the Never Search Alone organization. I was looking that up on the web yesterday and I thought, wow, that Never Search Alone is an amazing organization. And there's another company called Phenom, I guess, that is kind of like the foundation for some of these organizations. So if I'm a talent acquisition director or manager and I'm looking at my own team and I want to keep my team. I really like the team that I've hand selected. These are people that I've brought into this organization. But we're going to have our dips and peaks, right? Where we're going to have more hiring than other times. How can then we work with the employees of the organization? You brought up a great point about talent retention versus talent acquisition. So how are we going to retain our employees and our talent staff, right? Can we incorporate then, besides having employee resource groups, can we incorporate these job search consultants and that type of format into our organizations?
It is interesting. So the job search councils are helping people like have a structural approach to understanding what their job strategy is. I certainly think that everyone should be thinking about their career strategy. As a corporation, I think it's more about coaching and mentoring and helping people be the strongest they can be. Um, Corporations only have so many slots, right, for promotion. And so, and as far as being vulnerable as a corporation is also understanding like you might have to let some of your strongest team members go if you don't have room for them to move up. I think it is, if you are doing that as a corporation and going in eyes wide open about you are there to build karma with your culture and your organization. Right? And you understand, like, if someone needs to move, right, you have to let that little birdie fly out of the nest, right? You have to let them. Yeah, it's hard as a manager because you wanna hold on to your team because you need to deliver as well. But then you're not coaching your team members to be as strong as they can be, and I think it is also it also is that growth mentality, right? How is it a growth mentality for yourself as well as your team members? And can you have confidence that if that team member ends up leaving, they're not leaving because they don't like it. They're leaving because there may not be room for them to take their next step. That's a very, very hard thing for I think a lot of companies to do. But that comes down to the core of like, is this person in for a project or are they here for a career? It I feel like we've lost a lot of that ability to build an environment for people to have a bilateral commitment to each other.
I know. Isn't it the truth? Oh my gosh. Yeah, in fact, it's funny, but in all the years I've been recruiting, I would estimate that the number one reason that people are willing to talk to me when I recruit them if they're a passive candidate is because they feel pigeonholed and they don't see a way up or any kind of a growth pattern with their current company, even if they've been there a long time. I remember this one guy, I was interviewing him and he worked for, I think it was Oracle, I believe in Redwood City. And I asked him, I said, "So tell me why you're open to speaking with me." I go, "You've been with them for 19 years." He goes, "I'm willing to speak with you because I've been with them for 19 years." I loved his reaction. He said, "Honestly," he said, "I've been in the same role for 5 years." And he said, I had a there was a lot of progression for me." He goes, "But now I'm stuck." He goes, "There's no place to go." And he said, and honestly, he said, they've actually brought in people externally for some of the higher positions. So there's no room there because now they brought in these other people. So it's not like everybody got to move up in the company. Like what you mentioned, like they used to. People used to start out and have the same career and stay with the same company for many years and just gradually move up. But that's not necessarily always the case now. If somebody you worked with in the past, if you're an executive and somebody you worked with in the past becomes available and you see them as a great fit for your company, you're going to want to bring them in. But then what does that do? It pigeonholes then the other people in the organization who've been there a long time. So what do we do for the retention there? You mentioned growth. How do we grow the company to let everybody have an opportunity to expand their careers?
Well, and I think I've done this twice, and often actually it was both have just happened to be when I was at agency, because agency space is often very much you're doing a specific task. But both times I was at agency, it is about really starting to lay out what the career path looks like, but also laying out what it takes to move to the next level. And so when you have that kind of transparency in place, people understand why they do or don't move up. And I think it is, how do you help them when there is an opportunity, right? Because there's not always that slot for them to move up to, but understand that they will be help them be ready when that opportunity is there. um, and then I think there are just realities, like some corporations, they just don't have the space. And if we're comfortable with the way we're structuring our organizations, then we have to understand that some people, even if they're skilled, they need to move on with their career. And so it is a balance of opportunity, culture, and compensation. Um, and the biggest thing I think any company has in their control is culture. Because compensation is really based on profitability, and that's a very hard thing to do. But culture, that's something that any company can do. And understanding how to be as transparent as possible, set expectations, be good managers, be good coaches, be good mentors. And again, this is through the process of, if you're building a company for retention, right? If it's a retention goal. If it's a project goal, it's a project goal.
For the core population of your company, there should be a retention goal, especially for your better employees, right?
It's the growth mentality. When I was EVP at Digitas, AI and ChatGPT was just coming out. And my team was very nervous because it was a lot of engineers and a lot of technologists. And I said to them, we can look at this two ways, right? We can do the same amount of work with half the people, or we can do twice the amount of work with the same people. And it's for us to decide, right? And that leads to that growth mentality, right? How do we go and get more work, and we've doubled our capacity? And so it is the intentions from the top, right? Why are we doing these things? Because it can go either way. And how can we envision the future? And I think that's I think we can talk about, like, well, what does the future look like?
One of the things that I don't know if you and I had talked about it, were the talent, network communities. For as far as what the future looks like, I see a bright future if we can embrace talent network communities in addition to the I wanna say JSCs, yeah, job
Job
search,
search
yeah,
councils, the
JSCs.
JSCs, yeah.
I mean, because I think that some companies can gain popularity, especially, again, if you're wanting to retain the people in human resources and in your talent acquisition department, and those people then can be coaches to other employees, and they can help to form some of those JSCs internally in your organization. Especially, I guess I'd need to know more about the 6 person, you said there's 6 people per committee or something like that? How
But yeah, it's a peer group, but not necessarily within the same sector. Really, what they match on is really just years working. It's really that simple, because that allows just different perspective and different experiences. And so a lot of people, they just run the process and they're done. And many people are friends for years to come. And what we're seeing is a great acceleration in the number that are forming, because there's such turnover within the corporate space. But this, like, the Never Search Alone, like, job search council movement is surprising me. It's picking up speed. I found out about it. It was mentioned to me like a year and a half ago, and I didn't understand what it was. And then in the fall, I was like, "Oh, this is what was mentioned to me." And it just, for a lot of people that are trying to figure out, like, where's my world gonna go and what's my career gonna look like, it provides a process for them. But I think more importantly, for mid-career professionals, I think we have to think about, as most of our career has been defined by disruption and change. We're not checking in and out doing the same job for 30 years. It has been changing since the 90s consistently. And so in many ways, we've benefited by formulating our success through mitigating and navigating change. And so as we look at what this looks like in the future, the question is, how do we look at the patterns of the past and learn from those and gain comfort in that as well? Because we have seen quite massive changes and we can identify how those changes happen. Like in my career, I mean, I think about internet. I always say internet, mobile, social, and now AI. Like those are the four major disruptive pieces of my career and massively disruptive. But what we're seeing with AI is something that in a way we haven't seen before. And it's interesting as I often actually make it analogous to some things that I'm seeing in what's in education where they're starting to teach kids mathematics differently. And to mixed feelings about parents, but they're not teaching, for example, long division, right? And a lot of people in our generation are like, why? You need to learn long division, right? But if you have a calculator, right? Why do you need to learn long division? Well, if you don't have your calculator with you, fine, sure. Right. But what's more challenging and more sort of interesting is that they're training the kids to understand, does the answer look right? Because if you're relying on a tool, you have to know if the answer looks right. So it's not necessarily about how you get there. We know what looks right and what doesn't look right. And so, how do we help our colleagues feel confident that we know it looks right and start to embrace these tools to do more and understand what looks right? As we have new team members coming on that may not have had the experience that we've had, now we have to figure out how do we teach these new people that haven't had the experience if this looks right or not. And then we're going to go into the third phase. And the third phase is something that we have to set our imaginations to. And that is, if we have trust in these new capabilities, what is it going to allow us to do that we couldn't do before? And that is a process of imagining what you've never experienced. And that's a process of, I think, good managers are going to help their team members through that to say, okay, now that we're doing this and we have trust in these things, and I think that's the foundation, what else can we do? If you ask AI to do something, like, is that answer right or wrong? Okay, does it look right? Is it close enough? Like, again, similar thing that we're asking our children to do as they're learning these new techniques of math. And I think it's a critical skill for that generation. And then the question is for our generation that's currently still working, when do we get to a point of trust and comfort with new tools that, yes, we can do our job, but then it enables us to think about other things and imagine what else we can do.
Okay, this is amazing because this is like to your point, this is what we need to help people to broaden their skills to and like especially communities that of different people coming from different parts of the organization, not all part of the same organization, offers up rotational opportunities to learn more about the company. There was another company too, it's an agriculture software company. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but they have their employees doing what they call coffee chats or something like that with other employees who are working in different departments and talk about distributed. They are having them do these coffee hours on video with people working in distributed locations and other countries to get to know them, to understand what they do for the company, what their culture is like working for that company in that country, what the culture's like in their department. How are things different for you? Okay, we're working for the same company. How are things different for you in Ireland in this particular role? Just getting to know what other people are doing, learning who your other employees are, and having those opportunities. I just think it's fabulous. And talk about employee retention. I think it's one of the greatest ways to to retain employees.
Yeah, it is. And I think about serendipity time, right? Like And in the Northeast, there's a very intense work culture. And you used to go out to lunch, or at least have lunch with your colleagues and be able to take a break and those kinds of things. And I think in a digital world where you're always on and you have your email in your pocket, and the question is, where's the serendipity time where it's not that you're not talking about lunch, I mean, work at lunch, but you're having those opportunities to have a little different perspective. And I think where these groups are very powerful is it creates that serendipity time. It creates that space. And it is a long-term play for growth mindset, right? Like it is not about like, let's get as many hours as we can of someone at a desk because of the short-term efficiency. But I look at those types of actions of corporations as a growth mindset because two people might realize there's something better that they can do, or someone that is expert in one thing might be able to move to another department and help it out. So every company that is making this serendipity time is, I think, critical for being able to adapt to the future. And then, I think you're thinking about that in the context of a corporate organization. And then as an individual, I think every individual needs to think about where are they also getting inspiration from outside of that organization. And then it's a balance, but I think anyone that has those opportunities within their organization should absolutely take advantage of them because it is within that context that they will have specific benefits. And then outside of that organization, because that organization is a defined universe that has blind spots. And so as you start to, because we're in always in a world of transition and disruption, we have to be prepared to have sort of other perspectives and other things that we could be learning to adapt to change.
Wow, great conversation. Great conversation. And I do love that. I would like to find out more, and I will, on the talent network communities that these different companies are hosting and providing, because I think that that is probably one of the most successful paths forward right now for for people or companies who want to retain employees. In addition to, I mean, even if they are hiring contractors or whatnot, but
Yeah, I think a lot of these companies are looking at these organizations and how do we bring them in, right? Either Never Search Alone or Open Water, and how does the human resources department see, like, is this solving a need? Or the ERGs that they've been building on their own for years. But I think it is about how do we build strength within our organizations. Yeah. Yeah, it's refreshing.
yeah, it's all about empowering people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That human resource. That
that's
human
right.
resource.
And we will end with that. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your input and your expertise. So, Mike, if anybody wants to find you, how can they how can they locate you?
Yeah. LinkedIn is certainly all of our Rolodexes these days. And I think it's a great place to find me. Mike Scafidi on LinkedIn.
All right. And then Open Water is openwater.group for anybody who is interested in knowing more about Open Water. I'm a part of Open Water. I'm a member, and it's just fabulous. It's a fabulous collaborative group of people.
Yeah. Mid career professionals and trying to figure out what the future of work is for us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Denise.
Thank you, Mike.